Hi everyone, this is Ricky Spencer, and as part of our Sociology of Media Voices series, today we have the absolute pleasure of speaking to someone whom I've had the pleasure of co-facilitating with recently, and that is Tasha Turner. And I'm going to now pass it over to Tasha Turner to introduce herself. Hi Tasha.
Hey Ricky, thank you for having me on today.
So tell us a bit about who Tasha Turner is.
I could describe myself in many ways, I guess. My job is I'm a therapeutic counsellor. When I'm not being a counsellor, I spend a lot of time being an advocate. That's something I'm probably been doing longer than being a counsellor. I'm an openly queer person in a gender diverse relationship. I'm rapidly approaching 50. So I'm trying to avoid that because I don't have that concept in my brain yet. And apart from that, I'm a passionate defender of human rights. That seems to be like what I spend most of my time doing, to be honest.
Hmm. So tell us a little about your passion and your work.
Mm.
What led you to the pathway of choosing to be a counsellor?
Like most of us therapists, it's a bit complicated. So I have a really long history of dysfunction and trauma and addictions and you name it. And throughout that kind of history, I was a carer for my parents and for many of my partners. So I've been used to being a carer in various roles. I've been used to kind of observing and translating people's behavior when they couldn't really communicate what they needed around me. But I didn't go into that as a career. I was actually a translator. So I traveled the world. I'm Welsh originally. I traveled the world translating. Um, and then I landed in Australia because my friend said to me, "Do you want to come?" And I went, "Okay." That was basically my decision making process when I'm mid 20s. Got here and went, "This is fantastic. I'm never leaving." Carried on with a variety of careers, and then it was actually um, me developing a 24-hour nerve pain condition and
Mm.
needing 5 major cranial surgeries that led me to become a counselor because my own psychologist said to me one day, he said, "I'm going to take off my therapist hat," which normally would make me quite concerned because I thought, oh, I'm going to get told off. Okay. So we had a very good relationship, and he said to me, "Okay, so the thing is, I think you can do my job. Actually, I know you can do my job. And you keep giving me excuses not to train and change your career. And now you have no excuse because you're having head surgery, so you can't work and you'll be bored." And I said, "That sounds like a really great time to study to be a counselor. Like I'll have nothing else to do, obviously, apart from recovering." And
Mm.
he said to me, he said, "I'm not listening to that. I'm tired of the excuses. I would like you to try." And he said, like being a strong, like emphasis on like. So I said, "Okay then." And that's what I did. So whilst I was trying to recover from my head surgeries, which actually failed, I trained to be a counselor. And then I waited to set up my private practice because I thought, wouldn't it be better to set up my own practice when I'm not sick? And then I had to make the quite hard journey of acceptance to go, I'm not getting well. There's nothing else I can do. I've tried everything. I've been to America. I've done that many therapies. They're not working. So you need to just, using the Australian language, suck it up, start the business, see what happens. So that's what I did. I didn't really do an awful lot of planning, which is funny for someone with a marketing degree. I just went, oh, well, looks like I'm just going to give it a go then. And that's what I did. So I'm still quite surprised that I'm still in business, to be honest, because there was very little planning.
Wow, that's incredible. And tell me, what's some of the challenges that you faced in becoming a counsellor?
Oh, you mean, what kind of challenges do you mean? Just so I understand.
Oh, well, just like in terms of adjusting to giving some of yourself to your clients
Ah,
and
yeah.
becoming wearing the new
Mm,
persona, Tasha,
yeah.
the counsellor, as opposed to Tasha,
Person.
person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, still a work in progress on that one. So I am a kind of person who I always warn my clients first time. I'm like, I'm not fluffy. I've told you so that when you experience my non-fluffiness, you won't have an issue. So I'm quite a direct person.
Mm-hmm.
Part of that is, I have an autistic wife, so I'm used to speaking autistic. I joke. So I'm a direct person. I challenge people. I confront them. I call them out when I think they're lying. Um, I'm also pretty unshockable. Most of the clients I see have complex trauma. So for me, by the time I set up my own practice, I'd had decades of therapy, thanks to all my own dysfunction. So for me in a therapy session, it's actually really easy not to get triggered. So I'm lucky in that respect. I've done an awful lot of work on myself. I didn't have to learn how to put my therapist hat on and just focus on the client. Um, I don't do back-to-back appointments because of my pain, which means I can give my client a little bit more time if they need it, which means that if they're in, a really bad place and they've called hotlines or they can't get someone else, they know that if I'm free, I will help them. So I made a choice to go that little bit further where I can if it's needed and not let that be abused. Um, some of the challenges, learning how to manage my pain as I practice. So that's been interesting. Um, learning to try not to be too passionate. So I'm a very passionate person. I naturally get upset for my clients. I show my emotion in a session if I think something's terrible, and they know I will swear. I tell them I swear because some things I hear, the first response is normally me swearing, kind of displaying how horrified I am. Um, and me trying to then go, okay, now is not the time for me to start charging a campaign against someone. I actually need to be in the room with my client. And then maybe afterwards I can go on a campaign if I need to. But right now I need to put that to the side a bit and focus on what I need to do. So that's some of the challenges.
And tell me a little bit about trauma. What is it about trauma that interests you in exploring that in your counselling service?
Yeah, I'm smiling because I'm thinking of a particular example and then I can explain a bit more. So I get inquiries from people, obviously, and I don't see everyone. I have certain niche areas I work in
Mm-hmm.
because I'm a firm believer that nobody is good at everything. So I straight out say, this isn't my area. I think you should see this person. So I might get an inquiry, for example, about couples therapy for something relatively general, like communication issues. The average therapist will go, okay, great, good. Not too scary, not too intense, know how to do this. So I got an inquiry one day about that. And then about an hour later, I got an inquiry about someone with borderline personality disorder, multiple suicide attempts, self-harm and anorexia. And I'm like, oh, yes. And then I laughed because I said to my wife, I went, I think I have a problem. I think, why? This is the wrong way round. I should be running away from the one that is presenting a lot of trauma and intensity. One of the reasons is that's where I'm, in inverted commas, comfortable. So my background is many, many addictions, many mental health issues, suicide attempts, being in the LGBT community, sexual assault, physical assault, domestic violence. Not everything, but there's a good amount of trauma there. I've done a lot of therapy, as I said before. to work through that. And I think when I have a client who has complex trauma, which is often extended childhood trauma followed by several years of relationship trauma, for me, that makes I'm instantly interested, because I'm like, okay, there's multiple different areas this could go. This is fascinating. This is where I'm comfortable. I think I can do this. I know I can help this person with that. And I also I see the person who thinks they're broken, but I see beyond that. They can't see that. I can see that. So for me, then I can see that. Now it's my job to bring that through. And obviously the client does the work, but I'm the one reminding them, remember, your soul is still in there. And also, because I self-disclose a lot, I made the choice to do that because of the niche areas I work in. I will say, someone's come in straight after some horrendous sexual assault and they want to tell me, but they're afraid about my reaction, which is common with a client, then I might say, I haven't been through your precise experience, but this has happened to me. So it's all right. I can hear it. Don't worry about me. Whatever you need to say, you can tell me, and then we can work on it. So that's a really big passion area for mine, because, when I had a psychiatric breakdown in 2003, brought on by decades of anorexia, I actually felt like my brain broke. I never thought I'd recover. I remember not being able to match a pair of socks and sitting and looking at socks for about 4 hours on the floor and being aware that there was something wrong in the fact I couldn't match my socks, and just crying because I thought, that's it, I've gone insane. And I had to do 9 months of intensive rehab with psychiatric sessions every single day. So I never thought that I would survive that. So I very much have that as a passion, if I can help somebody out of that in some way. I'm only a counsellor, I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but if I can be part of that journey, it's a real privilege.
And can I ask you, how does something, say, in the media, how can that trigger a trauma?
For a lot of people who have been through trauma, unless you actually process it, which means looking at it, feeling what you don't want to feel, and healing and moving forward, unless you do that, the trauma kind of sits in your brain and floats around. It doesn't get put into the right boxes. So then what will happen is, if there's something in the media or somebody says something in a conversation, you're triggered very quickly because you didn't process it. So then what will happen, depending on the level of trauma, so some people have PTSD, and PTSD, you don't have to have a visual flashback. You can have an emotional flashback where you feel all the feelings that happen, but you don't see anything, you don't smell anything. Some people hear the trauma of what happened at the time. Some people get the whole lot, which is, far end of the spectrum of PTSD, needs a lot of work. So people get triggered in the media as well when it's not just one story. So like with the Me Too movement, did a lot of good and a lot of harm to people who hadn't processed their trauma, because it was a story every day, and it was, the graphic details, which obviously it's up to the person whether they read that or not. But a lot of people who've been through trauma and not processed it, pushed it down, told themselves that they're over it, don't realize that they have a problem until they read the article and then freak out and then go, oh, still have a problem.
Okay, that's so interesting, because we hear so much about, events that can trigger us, and as you've just articulated how that takes place, is it possible for a person to leave a trauma or to process a trauma so it becomes something that is in the past as opposed to being within the present, or is that not possible?
That's one of those questions that lots of us therapists disagree on, depending on who you ask. My personal opinion and experience has been it depends on the trauma, it depends on the work done, but it certainly can happen. So, for example, with myself, my trauma, I remember it, it still happened, but I don't get triggered anymore, which sometimes confuses me when I might hear something in a session and I think, not having a reaction. That's a bit strange. It's like grief. Grief doesn't go away, but you build your life around it. So it's definitely possible, but you have to work on it. You know, and I'm not somebody who says that people need to forgive. I believe some things are unforgivable, and forgiving, if it's for the person who's forgiving, fair enough, but not to forgive somebody else for something they've done that should never have happened. So I never put that as an expectation on my client, and you can heal from trauma without forgiving. Perfectly possible.
Are there things that you see in the media, and I'm thinking, I guess it can be digital, it can be television, movies, that make you angry that it shouldn't be shown because it really does, it's exploitative of an event that you feel will trigger? Or do you see that as a therapeutic, cathartic sort of thing happening?
It's a good point. I think, for example, with suicide attempts, you can get certain films where you see certain scenes that make it obvious that a suicide attempt has happened, but you don't watch it happening, right? That's enough. You know it's happened, which for some people, even that, the suggestion, can be a trigger enough, but it's not filmed. I think there is no need in a movie or a documentary to show someone attempting suicide. That's, even if you haven't been through it, that's extremely triggering. Another one, for example, could be, and this is actually a trigger for me, is when violence against transgender people is shown. So when it's talked about, that's still, because it's very close to home, that's still upsetting for me. But if there's actual coverage of that happening, same as, you know, in America with the coverage of Black people being hounded, that I think it would be a bit weird for anyone not to get upset at that. I find that, and I understand why it needs to be spoken about, definitely not hidden, because these things happen far too often. But I think a certain level of coverage, even if it comes with a warning, you know, there should always be a warning. And when I grew up a very long time ago, you know, after a certain time in the evening, that's when that kind of coverage would be on TV, not during the day. But now, because of social media, obviously people can access anything. So, and I think some people will say, oh, it's about freedom of speech. It's like, like you said, you're actually traumatizing people. It's not freedom of speech.
And do children process trauma the same as adults?
No. And that's something that makes me very sad. I don't work with children because it's a particular area. I work with kids from about 14 up. With children, if I can explain it basically, their prefrontal cortex, which is right here, hasn't developed properly until you're 25. So it's still forming. And it's in that area where we can analyze a situation, look at it from different angles, put perception on, put reality on. When you're a child, you're like a sponge. So everything that goes on around you, you generally accept as truth. Right? You just go, oh, that's the way that is, and that's how people act. And okay, you don't argue against it because you don't know to do that. And you're also being raised as a child, and you're like, well, I don't, people keep telling me I don't know, so I guess I don't. And what they do is generally they don't process trauma at all. So it literally sits there And this is where most of my clients are between the age of 40 and 55, nearly always coming in with, okay, I got to this point in my life and now I'm getting flooded with memories, things that I didn't think happened, or I don't know what that means. And it's really distressing because I have my very basic childhood memories that I don't have the detail. And what children do to survive normally is dissociate. So dissociation is when, say, a child is watching or experiencing something horrific, the brain will very cleverly go, this is too much. I'm going to kind of distance you from this now. So the child will be there, but it's like going off into a big daydream. It's like shutting off reality. So it's protecting the brain, because otherwise the trauma for the child is just too much. It's too upsetting. They won't recover. So if they dissociate, it means that they don't feel the pain that's being inflicted. They know what's happening. They don't feel it. They watch what's happening, but they don't try to question it. They just kind of numb out. And that can become a coping mechanism, which as they get older in life, if they don't process their trauma, every time something upsetting happens, they'll either go and try and get wasted or drunk, or they'll actually dissociate again. So they're not really aware of reality because they haven't learned a different coping mechanism. So trauma for children, I can't even think of the words, honestly. It's just so devastating and it's so unnecessary. That makes me mad when I hear what's done to children who can't defend themselves. And because of the job I do, I know what happens decades down the track. And that child, and I see and I think, oh God, please let them have some therapy, because otherwise they've got this life ahead of them.
And do parents, or I guess anyone, have it when we're looking at things like social media, and people using Instagram and Facebook and now TikTok? Do you see that as a safe place for people who experience trauma to access, or would you recommend people avoid these spaces?
No. I understand that social media, even for myself, can be very beneficial. It's really good if you're isolated. You can be in contact with different groups, and it's when you're older, not just when you're older, and you're using what we in therapy call your wise mind, you're able to go, oh, this is a beneficial space for me. Oh, hang on a minute, this is just like pulling me down a big black hole. But for teenagers, kids, or even adults who don't use that part of their brain enough, you can get, the cheating, for example, the cheating statistics during COVID have gone through the roof because people are at home and they're bored and they're sexting. That wouldn't have happened, right, if social media wasn't around. So that's just because people are bored and they're not going, oh, maybe that's not a wise thing for me to do. I see quite a few clients with eating disorders because I had a 29-year anorexia battle. And their access to social media, I say to the parents, please cut it off. Because my clients are comparing, there's pages on there where they can compare like all their measurements, their weight, their pictures. I have self-harmers who've shown me pages, which I'm amazed they exist, where they can compare the depth of their self-harming wounds, which I actually found that triggering because I was so upset that this was on there. I just thought, what chance have I got as a therapist of battling any of this if somebody can pick up their phone and basically fall into an addiction on their phone? It's so upsetting.
Well, so much insight you've provided us today on some of the things associated with trauma. Tasha Turner, it's been a wonderful experience today to speak with you, and I hope we can continue our series with you where we look at aspects of trauma, and I hope in our next session that we can perhaps explore trauma and self-harm,
Yep,
especially
sure.
something for me that I'm interested as part of the trans community,
Yeah.
and why our bodies, we can use this to weaponize against ourselves. So to our audience out there, if they would like to know more, Tasha, can they reach you? If someone was interested in your work, how can we reach you?
Yeah, I'm sure you'll put the links with the show notes. They can contact me at my business page, which is on Facebook, and it's Tasha's Therapeutic Counselling, or they can just phone me. My number is out there. It's 0431 998 593. You can just phone me and we can have a chat and see if I can support them.
Tasha Turner, it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you for being part of our Voices series. You've given us a deeper insight into the world of social media and trauma. Thank you.
Thank you.